Ooh, it feels good to be back. After spending far too long in a Dragon Ball Z style meta chamber, we are back with more recap coverage. PGL Cluj-Napoca, the group stage has come and gone. We are set for the playoffs later this week starting on Friday, and that means we need to take a second and go over all of the group stage shenanigans so you are ready and prepped for all of that action coming this weekend. Now you may think, with some of the biggest teams in the world not in attendance, this might not be that important of a tournament, but for the top dogs that are there, like Faze, Mongolz, Eternal Fire, this is a huge opportunity to capture some VRS standing without the other big dogs in attendance, and for some of those other teams floating around the verge of the top 10, who knows, you get an upset game over one of the top guys, all of a sudden you're the one who can shoot up the rankings in a big way. So there's plenty of tension in the air. PGL Cluj-Napoca has delivered some great games thus far, and what's nice is I've been allowed to co-stream it again. So make sure you guys check me out over on twitch.tv/LionHeartZ. Despite the weird schedule, I will be there to co-stream the playoffs, so hopefully drop me a follow and join me there. Without any further ado, make sure you guys take a second, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps out immensely the YouTube algorithm. And before we get started, let's go ahead and thank today's sponsor. That's right, this video is sponsored by Skin Club. They are one of the most popular case opening sites in the scene with over 100 custom cases backed by their provably fair system. You can open cases individually or wager your winnings against other users in case battles, either with players around the world or privately with bots if you want to avoid being smurfed outside of Premiere as well. But wait, there's more. Skin Club runs monthly events with free rewards to earn, free daily cases, and if you don't like what you earned, you can always go for a cheeky little upgrade to get something you do. If you want to play on Skin Club, you can do so at the top link in the description down below and get a 7% deposit bonus when you top off your account with credit card, crypto, or the 5,000 Peach 50 sand dunes in your inventory. Please gamble responsibly and only do so if you are over 18 and live in a country or jurisdiction that doesn't restrict gambling. Gambling can be an addiction, and you should never gamble for the purposes of making profit, only wager what you are comfortable losing. If you or a loved one are suffering from gambling addiction in the US or Canada, you can reach out to 1-800-GAMBLER toll-free to get help. I want you to be safe and healthy always, so seek help if you need it. And thank you to Skin Club for sponsoring this video. Okay, so obviously we are trying to condense a lot of Counter-Strike into one reasonably timed YouTube video, so we're going to have to make some compromises. Today, we're going to focus primarily on the 8 teams who qualified out into the playoffs, and then at the very end, we will talk about some of the notable teams who failed to qualify. That means we're going to be talking about how Faze, the Mongolz, Eternal Fire, Falcons, Pain, Mouz, Astralis, and somehow Saw managed to make it out of the groups. We'll be breaking those down into 3 distinct categories: the clear favorites, the teams that could win, and then the teams that are definitely just kind of glad to be here. Kicking things off right away, we had Faze, who were one of the first teams to make it out, going 3-0 in the bracket. They had honestly pretty great run. It feels like compared to Faze at Katowice, compared to Faze at the Blast Bounty, they are continuing to embed Liege into the system more and more. The roles for players like Frozen and Rain have been adjusted, and overall the cohesion, the strategic depth just continues to go up and up because, again, Kerrigan is the master of this shit. If anyone was going to figure it out, it's going to be him. What that mean in actuality? Well, Faze, they cruised. They defeated Saw pretty quick, pretty tightly. They beat Eternal Fire, a team they have not been able to beat as of late. They then rounded out by taking out Mouz, who are kind of their own mess. We'll get to that later on. Really, the big game you want to look at and see how Faze are doing right now is this match against Eternal Fire, because one, it's revenge for their close game at Katowice, where Eternal Fire beat them 2-0, if you'll remember, and this time, just everything about Faze looks stronger. The first place to start off, Liege is having a fantastic tournament. He's looking and playing exactly like the superstar you would want him to be in a Faze jersey. His aggression is proving to be a great X factor on Faze's T-sides, where throughout the event so far, their T-sides have looked so much more dynamic. One thing you have to shout out immensely is their CT side setups. Like in their last game at Katowice against Eternal Fire, their Anubis CT sides looked really sloppy. They weren't rotating their players around a whole lot. They're throwing very similar looks into Eternal Fire over and over, and as EF are the best Anubis team in the world, they took advantage of it time and again. And even though they do lose Anubis once again to Eternal Fire, things looked a lot closer. And then on Dust 2, another map that Eternal Fire are quite good on, they were awesome. They jumped out to a 10-2 first half lead on their T side, where they were dominating the EF guys in a big way. Once again, Liege just firing on all cylinders, but the bigger X factor for Faze right now is Frozen is having one of his best tournaments in a Faze uniform ever, where he's currently the best individual player in the field, coming out of this with a 1.36 rating, outdoing even Senzu on the Mongolz by quite a bit. With Rain really holding down on the lurking and anchoring on both sides, with Kerrigan's calls looking sharper than ever, this is a dangerous Faze Clan, one that I think can definitely realize some great games against even the better teams who aren't here, like a Na'Vi, Vitality, or Spirit. They are for sure, to me, the favorite to win this tournament. I think with their side of the bracket as well, something we'll talk about at the end of the video, nothing short of a finals appearance for Faze would be a bit of a letdown, because they dominated the group stage, they went out 3-0, pretty much as clean as you can, and now it's just about finishing the job in the playoffs. But in all fairness, they're not the only favorite in this field. Obviously, the Mongolz are right behind them. It pretty much feels like, in terms of the tiers, it's Faze and the Mongolz, and then Eternal Fire are close, and then everybody else. And the Mongolz continue their run in 2025 of just looking super good. Now, in all fairness, I think they had a bit of an easier bracket draw. They played Complexity in the first round. That was easy, don't even have to worry about it. They played Wildcard after that, and while I really like Wildcard, they are nowhere near being able to knock off the Mongolz. And then their advancement game was against Pain. And while Pain are super competitive, a team that I think can give the Mongolz a run for their money, and did, I also think the Mongolz were the heavy favorites the entire time. Whereas I think you can make a fair argument that Faze playing Eternal Fire, that is definitely a 50-50 game. Eternal Fire could have easily won that. And Mouz, for all their issues, still have some of the best raw firepower in the entire world. So, you know, you get them on the right day, I could see them winning that series as well. In all of the games for the Mongolz, they were the favorites. So them doing anything less than a 3-0 would have been a disappointment. The first place with the start, Senzu, who is still healing a broken fucking mouse hand, is the second best player in the tournament. Just doesn't even seem bothered by it. He is smurfing on the group stage. And dude, the firepower from Mongolz is so nuts. Senzu is coming back into form. Mizzino seems very close to taking a superstar leap himself. 910 is streaky, but also an incredible opper. You have Techno, who for a support player can just put out great performances routinely. And then you have Blitz, who is the best fragging IGL in the world. There's no other IGL who calls at the level he does and also clicks heads like he does. Every other IGL gives up something proportionally. Kerrigan can't really shoot, but he's a Gigamind. Cadian can't do either. Snacks can't do either. And I think that difference is pretty well laid out in the Pain series, because Big Azera is another very good fragging IGL. But you can see that Big Azera was struggling to call around the Mongolz. And yes, the Mongolz definitely have better star for star, player for player firepower, but they're not that far ahead of Pain. So comparatively, I feel like the Mongolz had a lot more freedom in how they decided to call and approach their T-sides. All in all, they drop a one map on their way out of the groups. It was an overtime Dust 2 game against Pain that came down to the very wire. Keep in mind also, in that series against Pain, NQZ had one of his best performances I've seen since he's been in Pain. Went off for nearly 70 kills by himself. That just does not happen every time for Pain, obviously. So if NQZ is even like 10% less, this is like a 2-0, like straight up. So thankfully, Faze and Mongolz are on the opposite side of the playoffs bracket, because it would have been a shame if something went wrong along the ways, and we ended up with both of them on the same side of the bracket, because these are the two best teams. I want to see a Faze Mongolz final, like, no matter what, and they are definitely the best positioned teams to make that happen, because they are Faze and the Mongolz. Great analysis, I know. Following those two, and really not that far behind at all, we have Eternal Fire coming in as the next clear, like, tournament favorite. And the only reason I would not put them on the same level as the other two teams is that, at least at this event so far, I have seen some unfortunately worrying trends for Eternal Fire, who, as we should all state right away, just like the Mongolz, have had a lot of woes in playoff stage environments. Neither team have yet to show themselves to be able to make that kind of deep run against stiff competition. So again, this is a good opportunity for both teams to grow and evolve. The problem is that when you look at the details, even though Eternal Fire won some good games here, obviously, they had an easy opener against Imperial Valkyries, no need to really focus on that. They lost a close series to Faze, as we already covered. They then took care of Big relatively easily, but they struggled a lot against 3D Max, who are in their own right a great team, don't get me wrong, we talked about them towards the end of this video, but watching that game closely, they're, okay, I'm just going to call it words. Okay, we're just going to leave that in. All right, these takes happen, we're just leaving it in. The big thing that you should be concerned about is that Zontaris is not playing like Zontaros has played pretty much every other game of this year. He has so far been just kind of okay. He's far down the depth chart in terms of the best players in the tournament. Jada has really stepped up and been the best player for Eternal Fire so far to compensate, but they need Zontaros to be a top 5 player in the world. That is what Eternal Fire needs. That is their win condition. And with Woxic also struggling, it's going to be a key factor in their possible downfall. Now, I will also add right off the rip, their opening game in the playoffs is against the Falcons, and Zontaros has been owning Nico in the head-to-head to start off this year, so they should be fine. I mean, the Falcons are a team we'll talk about more in just a little bit, but in a head-to-head, I would take Eternal Fire to still win that game, but if Zontaros goes missing, then things get a lot more hairy. Right now, a thing that Eternal Fire continue to benefit from is that pretty much no team in the top 15 that I can think of off the top of my head perma-bans Anubis. Pretty much every team plays or is okay with playing Anubis, and Eternal Fire are Anubis merchants. It's their best map. There is a reason that every time Major talks about Train, he talks about getting rid of it because he wants Vertigo back, because that was the other map they were insanely dominant on. So if you can get them away from Anubis or Dust 2, or at best case at least one of those, then their map pool takes a sharp decline. They are significantly more vulnerable on every other map that they play. They were not very good on Inferno for most of this event. Part of that, again, is because Zontaros has not been great. Their Mirage is only okay. Their Nuke is decent. And then they don't really play that much Train, and they permaban Ancient. So there's a lot of openings to be exploited. Now again, it comes with a caveat. That requires Zontaros to play below the level he has shown throughout the beginning of this year. Zontaros could very easily have a bounce back and power up in the big game moments. That would not surprise me. But again, I think we need to look at trends. At the playoffs of both Blast and Kato, Zontaros was noticeably worse than he did in the group stages. Right now, it's on Eternal Fire to beat the group stage merchant allegations, and they need every bit of firepower to make that happen. That's why, even though they are definitely a team that I would see winning this tournament, I cannot hold them to the same regard I would hold Faze and the Mongolz. They're still really strong, they are better than the rest, but I'm just worried about their current performance heading into these playoffs. Alright, so now we're down to the teams that I think need pretty much a miracle run to make the finals and threaten to win, and that is Falcons and Pain. Starting off with the Falcons. This team is continuing to be really hard to talk about, because I think we can all look at these pieces and see that Nico and Magisk are basically being added on to the heroic lineup in place of Shush and Nertz. Therefore, that should be on paper an upgrade in firepower for Kicksan and the system. The big problem is that the calling has not shown up to the same extent of the names on the roster. I am continually frustrated by a lot of the T-side setups, the CT rotations. There are just far too many rounds right now where Falcons are falling back on heroics, something that unfortunately Nico is quite familiar with in his long and storied career. The odd part to me is that we aren't really seeing much mid-round flexibility. Like, Falcons seem to pick one strat and more or less stick to it. I'm not seeing a whole lot of Nico calling his own shot and then following through with it unless they are already winning, and that's putting them in some weirdly close games where they lost to Pain, and they should be more competitive against Pain as a rule, if not winning that series more often than not. They dropped a map to Astralis, which just should not happen. Granted, it was Astralis' pick on Ancient, but still, it should not have been close. Like, this should have been Falcons winning more convincingly than they did. And then their advancement game against Mouz, once again, they drop a game to Mouz, which I think is liable to happen because of Mouz's crazy firepower, but there's still various moments where I can kind of see them being frustrated on the player cams, not very comfortable, doesn't feel like there's just a whole lot of cohesion. Another thing that we have to talk about in terms of individuals, TSS is not off to the same hot start that we saw in the previous two tournaments, where TSS was having plenty of games where he was outright carrying Falcons, but throughout the group stage here at Cluj, he's sitting at just a 1.08 rating. Magisk is not that far behind at a 1.05. Nico has been pretty much doing the brunt of the legwork. He's the fourth best player in the tournament. He is playing like the fourth best player in the tournament, so I don't really have much to say against Nico at all. Dexter is also someone that has to be called out here because the op is just so important. Dexter is someone who could be a firebrand, a just great catalyst for good play in moments and spurts, but he's largely pretty inconsistent. And kind of most damning of all, I haven't seen any of the like huge pop-off, like total carry games that we were seeing from Dexter towards the end of last year with Heroic. He just hasn't seemed to find that same flow state yet. And it's really hard to make sense of it because Kixan is certainly a good enough in-game leader. You have Zonic, who should be more than good enough as a coach to direct this team. You have Nico to supplement the mid-round calling. You have Magisk, who is a crazy anchor, a great closer to rounds even when he's not putting up big numbers. You have Tesses to augment the entry with Nico. You have everything that you should want to build an honestly title contending team. But so far, Falcons have yet to show me anything that convinces me they will be able to realize that anytime soon. So unless something just flips a switch, they steamroll Eternal Fire, you get Dexter popping off, I do not see how Falcons make a much deeper run from here. Could they beat Eternal Fire? Sure, that's always possible. I just don't see how they make it past, say, a Faze or even a Mongolz should they make it that far. It just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Our next team making it through playing damn near every game they possibly could were Pain Gaming. And honestly, even though they had to play so many games, there was only 1-2-0 on their way out against Virtus.pro at the very end, I think this has been a great bounce back event for them. Obviously, things have gone kind of sideways for them, especially at Katowice, but I think they bounced back really strongly. The calling looked sharp once again. Biguzera looked pretty confident. You had Davideus still putting in great work as the main carry, and QZ had a few moments where he was popping off incredibly well, and Pain getting through out of this field, I think just makes sense. They're one of those teams that kind of feels like a gatekeeper to the top 10 right now, where it's really genuinely hard to get an upset off against them, but they are going to struggle against the better teams above them. Get into it, they open up their tournament efforts by taking care of Astralis in 3 games, they beat the Falcons thereafter in 3 games, they nearly beat the Mongolz 1-2, those games were all incredibly close, and then in the decider against Virtus.pro, which is a team we'll be talking about towards the end of this video, they smoked them in 2 games, a very definitive win against a team that is rising up in a lot of people's opinions, including myself. So with that being said, what can we look towards with Pain coming out of this performance? Well, this has been NQZ's best tournament in quite a while, and considering that Brazil really lacks in true omping talent, if he can maintain that performance into the playoffs, that gives Pain another X factor of firepower. We already have Biguzera, who puts up great numbers for the IGL, Snow and Kawez are great support pieces who could occasionally pop off, and then Davideus, who is definitely the clear carry of this team, the star rifler, who is still outputting great performance after great performance. Oftentimes, as of late, it has been NQZ who has fallen behind in the big must-win situations, so seeing him start out looking so good as an individual I think gives me a lot of hope. Considering how many more maps he played than Elige, Senzu, or Frozen, coming in as the 5th highest rated player in the tournament I think is just a great performance from NQZ and is worth highlighting. Again, in that Mongol series, as we talked about earlier, he was absolutely insane. That game had so many overtimes and he was continuing to find big moment after big moment throughout, and that really kept Pain from honestly getting blown out. So as long as the calling remains sharp from Biguzera, which I think it will, then Pain are like a very scrappy team that I think if you're in a big stage situation, I really wouldn't want to be playing them, because you never know when they could power up, have a hyper carry performance, or a huge clutch from someone like Bigu, and that can suddenly change the tide of the entire game, because we all know how Brazilian CS works. If you allow them to light a fire under themselves, suddenly it's Kayota, it's Caralho, and suddenly you're going home. Looking ahead at their playoff bracket, they have Mouz in the opening quarterfinal, and that's a winnable game. They should be beating Mouz pretty much every time with their current situation, and then they'll most likely have a rematch against the Mongolz unless, I don't know, Cadian casts a hex on himself that allows him to call good T-side strats for once. I just, probably gonna have to play the Mongolz. And in that rematch, considering the Mongolz have stage choking kind of as a reputation need to beat themselves, maybe Pain sneaks through to make a finals run. It is possible. And now, we must take a second and talk about the 3 other teams I don't expect to do anything in the playoffs. Let's start off with Mouz, who have the best of the worst chances remaining to at least win a game. So this is the first time we're seeing Spinks in the lineup. So it feels like we could take a second and really assess what Mouz are going to be for the foreseeable future. And what it is, I watch Mouz play and I'm like, man, it'd be really cool if they had a young in-game leader, someone who was really good at assessing the situation, played very aggressive, self-sacrificing Counter-Strike, had a real good knack for enabling his star players. You know, maybe a guy who used to play for Mouz Academy and, you know, really proved himself in other teams, you know, maybe with like Gamer Legion, for example. You know, someone that I think you could bring in and really build a franchise around in the long term because, you know, he's young, 21 years old, looks like he only has upside as an in-game leading talent. You know, if Mouz had somebody like that, I think this team would be really good because, you know, Spinks, Torzy, and Xerxian with Jimmy as the anchor and the closer, that is like #1 in the world firepower. You know, if they just, man, but you know, I guess finding that kind of in-game leader is just gonna be so tough. I mean, you know, maybe they got to pick up Snacks. You know, maybe Snacks is what Mouz needs. Yeah, maybe Hooksy. Ooh, yeah, maybe Hooksy's what they need. I couldn't think of anyone else though. But no, on like a serious note, Mouz are gonna win games when they can just firepower diff the enemy team. Because so far, at least for this tournament, I have not seen any indication of really any complexity from Brolin as a caller. And I'm going to make the argument that that might not be necessary. When you have that level of star power, I think we can point to G2 when Nico was still there as an example of you don't need much. And if somebody else or Brolin can show some aptitude in the mid-round adaptations, then Mouz will not be terrible, okay? That is the through line, right? If you're a Mouz fan, you're never going to be shit because your team just has too much of a wealth of talent to allow that. But there is an absolute ceiling on the potential of this team, and it's anyone else with a good IGL. And I think that's borne out in the results, right? They beat Big 2-0, firepower diff. They beat 3D Max 2-0, that's a firepower diff. They lost to Faze. The firepower is comparable from Faze, and Kerrigan is going to walk circles around Brolin every day of his fucking life. And then they lost to Falcons. Again, comparable firepower, Kicksan's a better IGL. They then beat Virtus Pro to avoid elimination, where saying Electronic is a better IGL than Brolin is technically true, but it's like saying I'm better than you at Donkey to Basketball because you'll never see the proof that I can do it, but I said I did. So hopefully you see what I'm saying. Like, it makes Mouz kind of infuriating to analyze because they're just relying on that firepower. So looking ahead, obviously they have Pain in their first quarterfinal on Friday. Could they beat Pain by just muscling past them out of just sheer force of their star players? I think that's 100% possible. But I think that is a coin toss. So ultimately, if you're Mouz, I hope you're ready to learn G2, buddy, because until something changes, you're going to live just flipping that coin every game of what team you're going to bring to the match, because it's almost going to be impossible to develop that cohesion in so short a time frame, at least before the major. Brolin is going to need time to become an IGL if he's even going to. So cynically, part of me just wonders if this is a move to hand Brolin the Poison Chalice and then work on getting him out of the lineup down the line and then convincing Shuhei to come back. If Shuhei was here instead of Brolin, this would be one of the at least 4 best teams in the world immediately, which is just got to be so frustrating if you're a Mouz fan. Speaking of fucking frustrating, we have Astralis. Oh man, do we have Astralis. Astralis qualified. They did in fact make it out of the groups. That is the nicest thing I can say. Okay, let's just start off with the results real quick. They lost to Pain. They beat Saw. Yippee. They lost to Falcons. Expected. They beat MIBR in one of the most mind-numbingly frustrating series that I have ever watched. More on that in just a second. And then they beat Big, which, you know, yeah, they're both about as mid, is what I'll say about that matchup. Circling back to the MIBR game for a second, I managed to catch that one on stream, live co-streaming. That was a game of all time. Some of the most mind-numbing, terrible Counter-Strike I have watched at the tier 1 level in quite a while. Routine mistakes by both teams. It was a hilarious mess of a game that if you caught live, you were wondering what timeline you ended up in that resulted in this being how you spent your time. Dude, outside of Device just dropping like 500 kills on Mirage, that was pretty much the only highlight if you're an Astralis fan, which how can you be a fan at this point? The calling on this team is terrible. Yabby and Stound are frauds. Cadian doesn't know how to click heads, much less call an anti-strat. And then you have Device, who is, just metamorphing into his 2017 form again for some reason and looking lights out as an individual, but it just doesn't matter because Astralis aren't going to do anything in any tournament of note with any good team that is not decrepit. Like, I was wondering who was going to be like the Virtus Pro of this year for me. Like, what team was I just going to dunk on no matter how well they did? And at this point, I can't really say that about Virtus Pro because I kind of like what they're doing over there. I have to give my kudos to Electronic. I can only say Snack should retire so many times before even I get tired of it. So I guess Astralis are going to be who I just vehemently hate watching because, good lord, does watching Astralis play ugly Counter-Strike make me hate everything, knowing what they used to be and where they've ended up. You know, the former team that revolutionized tactical play in Counter-Strike, now routinely making bad peeks, not checking corners, just missing simple mechanical plays, throwing bad grenades. It's a hell of a timeline. The fact that these goobers made it into the playoffs over a team like Virtus Pro or 3D Max just kind of sucks. And then, in the biggest what the fuck how of the tournament, we had SAW make it into the playoffs. SAW. In case you guys didn't see... see what I did there? The news. SAW are a dead lineup. Sheer and Roman don't have a job right now, and they're in the playoffs. They are already kicked from the team. So, like, this is literally the last hurrah, right? You've already lost Udrix and Eridos, so SAW are already gonna like topple down the rankings, and then you walk up here to Cluj. You're already knowing you're kicking your other two players, so you're already going to start over after this tournament, and then you just fuck around and make a playoffs run. Now, this comes with the caveat that their bracket out was decidedly easy. After getting destroyed by Faze, losing to Astralis, they had FlyQuest, who are also bad. They then had Complexity, who are also bad. And then, bizarrely, this is the one that just fucking hurts my brain. In the last game, the Last Chance Saloon, 3D Max, who have been looking just endlessly good, endlessly entertaining, despite me underrating the fuck out of them, what do they go and do? They lose to this SAW team in 2 games to get eliminated from the tournament. How? 3D Max, this was the layup of all layups to make it into the playoffs. We should be talking about 3D Max making the playoffs right now. I'm like, ooh, Maka looks really good. Maka is the first guy to make the IGL op look good since Fallen did it almost a decade ago. Like, holy shit, they might actually do something. Maybe they get a wild upset. But instead, SAW are just dead weight in the playoffs. I hate to be this, like, glib about it, but they play Faze. Does anyone expect this SAW team to so much as, like, take a glancing blow at Faze? Outside of, like, maybe fluking another nuke win against Faze, what the fuck is this team gonna do in the playoffs? Like, this is what kind of sucks, right? Because we don't have all the top teams, there's plenty of room for lesser teams to make a run to the playoffs. Normally a good thing. However, ideally, the lesser teams making a playoff run should be lineups that are going to exist after the tournament. I know that might be kind of a wild concept, which just sucks, man. It means that Faze aren't going to be tested until the semis, and we know how Faze are. They're good. They're really good, but Faze, they always love to make you sweat a little bit if you're a Faze fan. And if it was 3D Max in SAW's place, 3D Max could win that game. I absolutely believe that. I don't know. I'll play Valorant. I've already made this bet once before. I will stream Valorant for an entire month and not complain about the game if SAW managed to take a map off Faze. You heard that right. If SAW win a single map in this series, I will stream Valorant for a month. I really hope I don't come to regret that. Anyways, those are the playoff teams. So let's take a second and talk about the notable teams who didn't make it. Let's just combine 3D Max and Virtus Pro because I have very much the same thoughts about both. These are teams on like the fringe of the top 15 with a lot of upside that I would expect to continue to do well in events afterwards. I think both of them are being pretty underrated. Virtus Pro especially continue to impress me, and I think Electronic has grown a lot as an individual and an in-game leader, and he's working with just a shit ton of firepower. 3D Max, I, again, underrate them completely. I never think they're going to do well in matchups, then they continue to do so. Them losing against SAW, total anomaly. Like, that's just not going to happen again. So, for all intents and purposes, 3D Max were supposed to be a playoff team. They were there. They just fucked it up at the worst possible time. So if we were just to run things back, I think they would make the playoffs, and then things get pretty interesting. For Virtus Pro, they honestly just had a pretty tough bracket to work with. They started things off easy, they lost to 3D, then they had 2 good games against Complexity and Wildcard, and then they had a tough matchup against Pain, and they had a tough matchup against Mouz. Both of those teams are just very good, despite their own issues. So it was going to be a tough game for them all the way. So I think had they had a different bracket, yeah, they could have made the playoffs quite easily. So I'm excited to see them at future events. If we get more smaller fields like this, then Virtus Pro have a lot more room to be a dark horse. I'm just excited to see how this team grows. Like, genuinely excited about Virtus Pro. I never thought I'd see the day. The other team I want to make a note about was Wildcard. They were one of the first teams to be eliminated. I still really like this lineup. I think Stanislaw continues to show while he's a world-class in-game leader. I think the firepower is actually pretty good. The biggest issue for Wildcard is going to be JBA. I almost said Fozy for no reason. It's because that headset dent is like burned into my memory. But no, Fozy's been great. JBA just chokes in big games. As soon as he plays better competition, JBA falls off the cliff. I don't know if he's going to develop and get over that, or if he's going to be stuck in like the North American talent pipeline of never realizing it. But JBA goes routinely missing, and that puts a lot more strain on everybody else, and that leads to Wildcard falling behind in these games where I think they should be more competitive. Like, yeah, they weren't going to beat the Mongolz, but against Virtus Pro and Big, those are both winnable games for them. So I think this is just something that Stanislaw needs to keep working with JBA, keep developing him with LAN experience, and let's see what he can do. But ultimately, JBA would be like the first person I would move to replace on this team, and then Wildcard might get a lot better. All right, that's actually going to be it for today's video. I think we kept things pretty concise. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this group stage wrap-up format. Last thing we'll note on here, here's my mock playoff bracket. I'm going with Faze beating Saw, obviously. I'll take Falcons to beat Eternal Fire, just because I think Zontaras hasn't shown me enough at Cluj specifically. So I'll take Falcons and Faze in the semis, and then I'll take Mongolz and Pain in the other semifinals. I don't think there's any reason to expect another result there outside of Mouz shenanigans. Then, in the finals, I think we will see Faze versus the Mongolz, which will be Cinema, best of 5. I will be co-streaming the playoffs, so make sure you guys join me over at twitch.tv/LionHeartZ2 once again. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe because it helps out immensely the YouTube algorithm. Thank you to Skin Club for sponsoring this video. If you check the top link in the description, you get a 7% deposit bonus. The next time you fill up on Skin Club, please gamble safely and responsibly. Thank you to our channel members, Justin, Jesse, Furley, Milan Berta, Bubblesj, Dr. Cocktor, Patatas Kaftesi, PTR, B1 Games, Cody Foxworthy, and Justin Vander Vegt. If you want to become a channel member, you can do so at the link in the description down below. Get your name at the end of videos just like this, as well as a role in our community Discord. Thank you to our channel members. Make sure you follow me on Twitch. Anyways, see you guys next time. Peace.